I'll think of a name and then 5 minutes later, I think that is just a silly thing to call something. So we will kind of unname this set. And as we go, we can create some philosophy around it. But to begin, what you'll have is your bolster behind your legs. Your legs are going to be setting themselves up on a sandbag, right? So you have a bag cross horizontal on your mat. And I would encourage you, instead of this kind of hyper focus of rounding to get into the forward bend, maybe to come up to a standing experience, even feeling your hip flexors pulse a little forwards. Feel how that moves into your arch of your spine. And also how it doesn't mean you have to tuck the tailbone under to do this. You can focus on the field of movement in your thigh bones, right? It's as if you had your thigh bones like being held on a string, right? They kind of sway a little forward and back. Oh, I finally could make life that easy with my thighs. But as I step, I gotta go 1 foot at a time for my balance, but as I step up onto the sand, the toes up, the heels on the floor, I'm going to start to work on hands back or in the air. And then as I flow my kind of rigid sensations in some ways of my body going into this forward bend, I get a hold of my blocks. And you'll want to have enough space that even if you're near a wall, that you can consciously lengthen from your tail. And then your emphasis is to go from maybe a feeling of your tail moving back into an element of actually untucking. So as you bend your knees, I find that the sand is a little bit challenging to work with on my legs. So the knees may tend to move together. I want you to really emphasize the knee separation. And as the spine is in a little of a curling state of releasing tension in the back, let your arms either be held onto the hands on the blocks, any height will do, or on the floor, or on the back of the legs. And we start with that assisted circulation of inversion. So our spine is contributing to reversing the flow to the brain and the heart. And we'll do this in a few different phases as a heart healthy opener for your practice. Steady, slow breaths. Be sure you have access to your blocks under each hand now. And then we slide our feet just back from the sand, and then you might put your sand on top of your feet for grounding and rooting. And we are close to the bolster, and we will be actually sitting on it fairly soon, but I want you to find your perception is still with the extension of each leg from each foot, right, into the heel bone. And then approach a little bit of curiosity. Maybe you lift your head, maybe you wag your tail. The tail still has this position where it's not really necessarily trying to tuck and move into a rounded shape, but I want you to just feel how it arches and extends, and then how it actually flexes, you know, as if you're kind of sampling the spine, like it's one of those straws that you can kind of fold and it makes those funny sounds, and your spine maybe does the same thing at some point. But as you move, it has this mobility just like that, right? And sometimes it gets a little bit stuck. In fact, you have you know, the colon in the front, and that wiring and that tubing gets some circulation advantage right now. So feel this as you come into your standing child's pose. So the hands are going to release from any grasp. And if you can bring them back to the bolster, so the palms are open, and then surrender the weight of the brain down from the spinal cord. Give a few moments, just a few of these lifts of the sitting bones, releases of the spine, as if it's a cord, right? That's the idea here. Now, before we come down to sit, I want you to find a final few moments without the sand on the feet, and maybe place the feet to a proper distance from your bolster and maybe wide, so that you can start to work from the straight leg pattern, and then slide the blocks in besides your feet, but far enough out that you have them as for support. And then you'll use them to assist you in sitting on the bolster. And some of us might find that we actually put our blocks back on the bolster, or they're in front. So you're going to lower down, hopefully with continuing to stay on top of the bolster. And then put the feet together, the knees out and the feet together in Baddha Konasana, and position your seat fairly solid, and feeling how the motion widens out from the sitting bones. In fact, you might kind of lift each leg. You kind of feel the skin as it lifts, and then it tries to center down onto the bolster. Take a belt. This is a fun one to do when you're seated upright versus we always do this on our backs. But try this pose how it was kind of first intended with the belt. Is we have a loop. It's pretty wide, I suppose. So as I take the belt around my tops of my feet, scoop it into the top of my feet, still sitting on the bolster. I'm going to tighten that up. And I want you to have that belt so it is at the lowest portion of your back. And you know, it's interesting how far forward you bring your feet in comparison to your knee comfort. So I'm going to give myself a little extra space so there feels like some friction in my core, and then practice cat-cow here. So you have your belt, and you see how my belt support is. I think most of you are aware of this pattern. The belt support is so it's in the inside layer of my ankle. Hands are on the knees. And then when you round your back, which has a feeling of moving the pelvis under, yep. And then you work on just simply, it's not a big degree of change from that position to sitting up. And exhale, rounding. Inhale, lifting. Okay, so select a few moments where you're motioning your spine between the shoulder blades and using the belt kind of as a hammock. So there's no right and wrong. You might find that the belt is really helpful, kind of meditative tool I find for this, for seated upright. This is something you can use in practicing, in sitting. Using the belt around the feet in this arrangement gives you kind of an attunement to your root, pelvis. Now, next time you move into spine neutral, then turn to the right, and we'll take the left hand to the right knee and be kind of soft and rotatable through that mid spine. Right hand back. Now, you might need a block behind you. I suppose I could use one for my right hand, and you might be comfortable reaching the floor, reaching around your waist, reaching the blankets. So some of this practice is a little bit spontaneous, kind of organic material. Some of it will be very specific, and some where we randomly fluctuate in a pose. So as you come back forward, feel your shoulders roll back. Okay, doing a couple shoulder and neck particular support. So you can do either one of shoulders rolling. And the secondary option would be shoulders are down and head is tilting from side to side to stretch your neck. Just be slow, no holding onto your head to pull, just feeling that motion and the transfer of weight. Center, feel your feet push into the belt so there's resistance to hold your back chamber. And then feel when you push into that belt, a sense of kind of this inner buoyancy, right? Lower belly, and then start to turn to your left, and your right hand goes to the left knee, and you might reach back to that block, the blanket, any assortment of realities for your support in the left arm. And maybe you feel like touching down a little lower is unique to your creativity of trying to create that inner lift. But working with the inner lift minus like pulling the belly button in. So if you can find that establishing inhale, belly is comfortably relaxed. And exhale, belly motions towards the spine. Okay, so get a few more moments here. Feeling rotation. Okay, now when we come out, we'll move the block because we won't need it when we come back to center and front. But actually we will. Let's go ahead and get a block. Okay. Feel that resistance with the belt before we lose it. And so kind of tap into, maybe your hands are on the knees like we did with that cat-cow, and kind of feel the relationship of the belt tightly wound around your body. Right? Really feel where that tension provides the inner lift. And as we buckle, then I want you to add a block inside the feet. So it's at the smallest setting. So just narrow between the feet, move the belt behind you actually. So now you have unbuckled, your belt is being held by the hands. And small lift with your arms. So this means we're not gaining the arms to be the height of the shoulder. If you do go that level, you might find there's a point where it just kind of eases up after a lot of strain. So find where it's a little lift up so your arms feel toned, just tone. And then lean forwards and feel the feet push a bit into the block. So block pressure. So the adductors wake up, also the hips warming up. So part of our hip work today is to help work on opening the hips to help the pelvic floor, right? Oftentimes those are related, clearly. So my arms are fairly low here. Not a bunch of effort with the arms, but holding the belt. Okay, now can you round your spine, so chin towards chest, come back up to neutral in the spine in comparison to the hips. And then, kind of remember when the belt was around the hips and the leg, how that held them even. So I want you just to look down at the legs, notice if they're fairly even lifted, right? If the belt was useful to help get that process going. And then let go of the belt behind you, tap it aside, keep it back for easy reach. And then turn that block between the feet flat. And we're going to put it right next to the bolster. So it's flat right next to my pelvic center. And then bring the knees up and sit on top of the block. This is where having a wall can be excellent and also a little bit uncertain if it's too close. So when you lower back, I want you to reach your feet to the wall space or whatever space you have. Actually, that's not necessary, but reach your feet forwards into the supported bridge. Underneath you is your bolster and your block. And then on top, you want to feel that the hip layer is gradually neutralizing here. So get a sandbag and prop it over the front layer of the hips. Use the place the bolster kind of hits into the body frame, and let that rib span, especially if you touch your ribs and sense the movement in like the lower frontal portion of the ribs. I want you to spend the energy going forward here on the movement higher up in those ribs. So you have this kind of rib expansion exercise going on. Okay, so can you do that without using these kind of supplement of prop to hold and pull? We can get there if we want, but it's almost as if I grab the belt and pull. It's too excitable for the muscles to get back to your core breath. So keep it really simple. So my sand could go a little bit lower, it feels a tad bit on the frontal pelvis. And my feet don't have to be at the wall, but it just happens to be an exception that there is one here. So it's nice for me to push into something. The other thing you can do with your feet if you are in the middle of the room is put them like on a towel or a blanket roll or your other block. And so that gives them an energy of drawing, being lifted and reached forward. So it's an option, or keep where you're at. Assess your blanket under your head. I've got one too many now. My neck is not needing that type of mobility. So open up through the ribs. If you have two sandbags, add another right here. This is a really good spot to put a sandbag too, across the rib cage. And then as you spend the energy of letting your eyes relax, which is not spending energy, but recharging, expand your inhale inside. Okay, breathing in is for your insides. It's to receive. And breathing out is for the external world to do something with that waste, right? So that's another issue here going on. But welcome the exhale lengthening. Good, and let your head relax if you need to nod it side to side. Moving the belly with the breath. Okay, there's always a place that you can bring a little more attention towards in the evenness of the upper ribs with the breathing experience. Now the back bend, right? It's a back bend, although, your mind might have other versions of processing this than that simplicity, but there's this little bit of that arch going through to attempt to get your legs to sway this direction with the thighs long. So let's try a Baddha Konasana here and just kind of feel how that shifts. You might have to move your sand away all the way. You might have a sandbag across the kind of the lower upper rib span, closer to the navel center, so that you feel pretty comfortably centered in your upper back. But when you do challenge this situation of moving the legs, bend both knees to point up, okay? And then when the feet move together as they have before, and the knees move open, feel if this Baddha Konasana changes the connection to the frontal hip bones. When you're sitting upright, this may be the last place you feel. You still feel the adductors, but possibly this is where you start to feel a little bit of a scratch of sensation in that frontal hip bone. And then the back muscles could have a really interesting squeeze in the very lower space where it's intended to do those for that process, but be a little careful. If it feels uncomfortable, then pass on the option of having your feet so close. Maybe scoot them a little forwards. And then as we take our belt, if you're not using the sand, that's okay. You can go without it for the time being. Sand or not sanded, but a belt goes overhead, both hands holding, very intensive for all purposes when you move back, that your hands are not too spread out on a belt. So I want you to feel that connection when you hold your belt. So shoulder width apart is too narrow right now. A little wider is helpful. You'll have to find when you bring your belt up over your chest, like if you were like lifting a bar here, it's probably a pretty good example. If you were to hold that bar, you probably are going to have it maybe a little closer in than you really would like to, to make it easier. So you're going to slide your hands out, and you could get the bar to get up and down if you had your hands too far open. But have a position where when you move your arms back overhead to put the bar back, basically, you'll feel kind of the disc of movement in the shoulder blade and the armpit chest. Take a few of these where they're in motion. So I bring the belt back up and over, and not too activating. Let's just do a couple more. Simple. Breathing. So the inhale is when the belt goes up, forward, over the chest. Exhale is when it goes overhead. Okay. Let go. Bring your knees up, pointing up, and roll to the left and come off of that block. So be a bit of a quick shift because we're all experienced. So we're going to slide up so that we're prepping for a side sage. When you have your blanket stacked, and add that stack so that it's close enough to your bolster for just an arm to be between, nothing extra. I want it to be fairly snug, okay? So with the idea of maybe you have a block or a ball on the inside of the right leg, maybe you have a sandbag, first things first here with our sand. And then we have this reach of the arm overhead on a block or the floor. And we, in character of the ribs, we've now flowed from this front layer. And I went a little quicker than I was really initially considering in the last, when I was setting this thought process up, just because it seems like we had a good amount of time in that front zone. And it's time to kind of get around the whole cage of the ribs. So now you have this opportunity to feel this spine and the arch of the spine. Now, this is generally a nice lower back releaser. It just kind of releases what little compression you may have been experiencing in the beginning or in the last few moments, the last pose, with a reclining arch. And feel if you still have a slight arch in the back, but noticing that the ribs expanding really helps the back sensations release. And breathing, maybe eyes are closed often. We're going to be sneaking in some arm balance strength in a moment. So I want you to just feel the ability to radiate from the armpit. And then even if it's just that that's connected to the ribs, your whole arm is nice to have because it creates traction. You know, if you just lift it up and all you had, right, was the armpit, and you might still be able to engage in these actions, but let's use the arm that we have to reach and then create that and really enjoy that traction in the torso from the arm reach. You kind of never know what good you got until you notice, oh, and then I'll use my whole arm. Even if it's just an arm that's kind of using its weight to support your length. It's a good arm. It's good to have that. And loosen it up if it's too much or you have some limitations, then back off and take that limitation seriously so you're comfortable. Okay, and we're going to properly kind of tune the arm a bit with, you know, I don't know if you think dog pose is an arm balance, but I think it's a balancing for the arms. So when we let the sand slough off, don't need more than a minute and a half or so on that one. Yeah, sometimes it's nice just to let it find its way to shift. And then when you rotate your hips to the left and the knee draws back over to the left leg, let's take the moment here to keep all the props set the same. You're going to take your knees, so they're about hips distance. You'll probably be facing maybe another direction to get to hands and knees, but move the shoulders, scooting anything out of your way so you get your hands between the props. Kind of feel if you, maybe this isn't scooting a shoulder, but shrugging a shoulder, bend your elbows, even if they push into the bolster a bit, toes under, and then feel the body go forward and back. This is another pose where you do untuck, right? When you lift up your knees, this is untucking. So when I lift up my knees, I go away from tucking, and then as I stretch back, I'm going to use this barrier of the bolster to be challenging me. But if you don't like that bolster barrier, which it will make you kind of work a little harder to strengthen through the upper body, you don't have to use it. You could kind of push it away with your head, okay? So let the heels reach themselves into alternating patterns of movement, bending the knees, pedaling through the legs, or keeping that reach a very pure downward dog. Maybe you're a pure downward dogger, just pure down dog. Brain is steady. Yep, it's a fairly intense position compared to our first one today, as far as the arm channels. And feel the sitting bones moving in their direction, and they kind of stop. Lower your knees and go back to that feeling of arching the spine. Chest moves forward. Head gently lifts. Okay, now as you hollow through the belly and round your back, feel if you can move from the spine to the shoulders when the head moves in towards the chest. And then neutralize. Okay, and then take the knees in together and then turn to your side sage on the other. We'll save some other hands and knees work for very soon after this, but I want to do just little pieces of it. So when I lean, I like to sometimes come into this shape like I'm kind of careening back. Right, so sometimes this could be a nice way to go into it and kind of feel, how do you invent the kind of that rounded wheel-like motion here of the rib zone. If I say cage, it kind of has a box thought of, it's in a box, but it probably so desperately would like to get out of the box. But it is containing and protecting your organs, right? So especially into your lungs and your heart. So when you're here, if you add that sand, add it. If you decide on you don't want the sand, it's okay. It's not going to necessarily enlighten you. You know, it might be grounding and kind of rooting for the tissues, and it can also be calming. But feel how the leg top is moving down out of the hip. Especially feel from this point of perspective. Often we move out of the hip by crossing the leg over and stretching the back and smoothing out the hip as the knee crosses, but this is the opposite. But the knee still can cross through the midline and move out, back behind me. I think it's pretty tiny that it's moving actually, but that's the idea. So if you have sand, you add it. If you haven't already, this is how it would go. If you're on the left side, it could go the length, even if it's just a little bit of length on your hip to your lower side of your waist. And essential, let the brain go. Weight of your head is heavy. So feeling where the ribs are isolated in a lot of ways in this midframe. But the suggestion of the movement of the ribs is very global with the breathing, with our oxygenation. So that kind of connects you out into the world a bit. Now, if the weight of your back is feeling like you want to kind of push it down versus swing the arm open, that's okay, to support the spine. But take these final moments where you do feel, even if this upper arm is modified and it's down, still feeling where your head is relaxed and your breath kind of hits the mark of the inhale and then letting go. So really play with that, especially in your home practice. It's what we're building up to is kind of out there with the breath and the movement, and it can get that way. But the more you kind of travel with that breath cycle in the still poses and then into the moving poses, you kind of can go lots of places just on a mat, okay, with your inside environment. Yeah, it's definitely like its own little journey, isn't it? Besides the journeys you might take moving your body out in the world, but feeling this inner environment skill. And the next few moments, let that left arm start to wind its way. And we are going to do arm loading in a moment, but I want you to feel the bones kind of really try to open up. That's a lot of bones that we're working through, tons of stuff. So when you roll to the right side, you're gonna let your sand slip off, we're sand free. And then let's move into that right side and take our bolster to the feet, okay? First I'm gonna get on them, but we're gonna have a bolster at the front. How many ways can we use our props? That's kind of what we're up to all the time. Or I am, not you maybe. Take your, I think for sanity in your brain, you're gonna probably want that in front too, just so it's calming. So we're going to take a kneeling on the blanket, getting some blocks to the sides of your mat. I'm gonna move this one over so you can see me a little easier. Okay, so we got a blanket. I'm kind of dedicated to the quarter fold. I can't seem to quite get out of that reality in my practice. So maybe someday I'll find a new blanket fold. But for the time being, I got my blanket in front of my bolster right here. Okay, you're gonna want to reach your hands on the bolster, but I want you to have this blanket so when your forehead comes down, you feel this tilt in your neck, right? So it's, the arms are going to be the possible challenge here as far as your range. So I have a pretty far out hope with my bolster this far out. But if you decide, that's a doozy, I can't, it's too much strain and my arm is getting tingly. Another option is taking this blanket and make it a little higher. And that's going to cause less of that pull, just a little less. You just have to kind of mush your blanket with your forehead until it's pleasant. The blanket works really nice. It's versatile with ability to compress it. Now, I tend to like to lower my elbows down on the floor here for a few moments and just kind of set my spine, kind of feel it lifting. Toes are relaxed. And then take a reach with an arm at a time back to the bolster and work the shoulders a lot. Breathe. Do any kind of movement that you can with your armpit chest, even if you kind of swing the ribs a little side to side. Feels a little funny to try to do that with your hand on the bolster, but you can push a hand and then do a little mild quarter twist to the side, head down on the blanket. We'll get there. Okay, now lower the elbows to the floor next to the blanket. Lift up your head. Blanket is a spacer. Okay, just give this a try, a little bit of arm strength. Now, if you lift up your knees and you find that the arms kind of buckle on you or slide out, come back down, pass on the pose, come back to the first one. Hands on the bolster, head down. Okay, so let's maybe some of us give it a try. If you feel up to it, elbows on the ground, forearm, dog pose, elbows down, hands down. Lift up your knees and try, if you put your head on the blanket, that's helpful, isn't it? I just don't want you to overly start to flex through your neck. So you have your forehead touching down. So a lot of awareness cruising your upper arms here. Okay. Now, that's a lot of heart work, right? When you push into that area. So come back down and then lift up through the elbows and lower them back down. Just take a few of these. Lift up your elbows, hands on the floor. Exhale, lower them down. So it's kind of bowing into your props here. Bowasana. Come up, good news. Shift your props a little bit. Okay, what I want you to do is take your bolster to the, any side actually, it doesn't matter. I just need to have it here so you can see me. So put the bolster to the side, blanket can go away, and then taking your left arm forward, and I want you to reach the right arm under the left arm just for about 10 seconds here. So just feel that crossover. So your hands are on floor, you're prone, face down, but your left arm is forward, the right arm moves under, okay? So it's the progression, and then come up, hands, reaching, palms open, arch the spine. Exhale, round the back to a cat pose. Neutral, right hand straight forward, left arm leaves under, head lowers down. If you got props in the way, just kindly push them a little bit. And then feel maybe the difference from one shoulder to the next, if that's something you want to observe. Hands spreading out on the right hand, come back up center, hands wide as possible on the mat, like seal. So I turn the fingers out, knees close-ish, a little closer in the hips distance, and then swing the hips down and the ribs forward and up. Okay, so feeling that combinational impact of arm strength, right, and core flexibility. Okay, now come back to table. And then when you wind up, you're going to round the back and then reach your hips back towards your feet. Hands could turn back forward. Okay, so we're going to weave these motions of We'll repeat the up dog one more time. So we'll call this seal dog. So the fingers, the hands turn out. I don't think your fingers turn out, your hands turn out. You lean your weight forward. You decide on the intensity. And notice how that moving the weight down to your frontal hip, what that responds in your shoulder capacity to hold you up. Okay, so as you come back to neutral, get a block under one hand and a block under which other hand you didn't get a block. And weave that right foot forward, kind of stretch it front, kind of snake it between the blocks. And as you guide the knee to a lunge, lift the back knee up by hooking the toes under, and stay kind of in this in-between state of, lunging work and range of motion exploration. So we feel that right knee above the ankle, and let that left heel feel it's in between. It doesn't have a commitment really. Okay. So as you lean back, so the right leg provides that full pointedness through the foot almost. What does it feel like to try to get your tummy to that right leg, like you're trying to reach it over the right leg, the stomach. And then leaning down, toes lift up on the right foot so you progress in the connection. And try to make the connection with your hands on the blocks. Now, if you are one that is comfortable with your hands a little lower and you're not like completely in a shakedown, you're just not shaking it all out, then that's okay. If it happens to come to that, you can let the hands lower. But, keep in mind that you want to be able to still keep the ribs flowing from the lumbar, right? So if I do this and I can lower down, I can touch down, but my midsection is collapsing, I'm better off here and working here. Eventually, maybe I can get that area open enough to go with the pose. Right foot toes down. And then start that lunge again. We move forward through the right knee above the ankle. And we really reach that left leg back now. So I want you to try to lower your lunge quite a bit so that left thigh spans back. It seems to be more weight in your hands when that occurs. Unweight the hands by lifting the hips and carefully turning to your left. Toes in now, turning left, wide stance, okay, forward bend. So do a little bit of scooting around until you have your feet in a wide position with the toes turning in. And the blocks can be forward, far enough out that you stretch through the lines of the arms as your head lowers between. Feel that you're leaning back in this pose, like it's not purposely to put weight into your arms, but it's to project that circulation in the sitting bones. And it almost feels to some of us like the knees are hyperextending in this pose, right? It feels kind of like they buckle a bit. So I want you to let the back of the leg muscles lengthen, but tone the thighs like you're pulling up the kneecaps. So lift up and drop the front of the legs above the kneecaps. Feel that arch through the back. And then really let the body sense how your forward bend will contribute as a inversion. So you might need to scoot your toes in, bring your weight into your blocks again, bring your feet a little closer, and then go into head below heart. So inversion here would be, I bring my blocks in. Some of you will go this variation where you'll take your hands to your ankles and bring the crown of your head towards either the blanket or the floor. And some of us will find they bring the hands between the feet, right? You can move your blanket so the hands are in line with the toes, elbows bend, and then you bring your head down. But it's the crown, right? So if you have a crown, right, you want to keep it so it moves down, and the sitting bones lift up. Okay, so keep working with those elbows moving back. I like the hands on the floor version so I can get my combination in my spine centered to the brainstem. But both are good. Hands on legs is good too. If you tend to get lightheaded and a little bit blood pressure sensitive on this one, holding on to your legs is better. All right. Likely you're going to keep it together a little easier. Okay, now bring the hands now to a level where you can make change and reach for your blocks. You don't need to go make any change. Turn forward to that right foot again and swap the feet at your own leisure. Like notice, how would I do that in a really kind of cool way for my hips? Maybe I push off the back foot and then step and maybe feel your feet under you. Maybe you lift up your arms and take a reach. If your blood pressure is going well, right? You don't want to get too zany on your brain there. And then when you come back and switch the right foot behind you, start with that lunge purpose of the knee above the ankle. And a lot of this is, pretty brain sensitive material as far as your coordination. So, really emphasize being in the moment and the simplicity. And there's so many layers that you can kind of connect into in that moment internally. But also it's just finding the presence of the bones and, weight bearing and just feeling like a body, that is weight bearing on a planet and keeping it stable. That's kind of it. So as the right leg reaches back, you can let the knee lower, you can keep it up, keep it toned, and start to cruise the weight back into that. Actually, I feel it first in my left heel. And then feel as the heel stretches back and down, and your leg might turn out on the back foot. Your front foot lifts up, toes up, and then it's like you're trying to move your belly to your left leg. And massage through the kidneys in the back. So let your head lower down. And moving away from maybe how it looks. I mean, even we may still go, okay, it looks like you need your body closer to the leg, or maybe the arms look a little bit scrunched or the shoulders are kind of hunching. Really go with your feeling right now. Not worried about what it looks like, but feeling that the awareness is breath. The touching of the feet to the floor, and then the energy that emanates up into the leg bones. Lower the left foot. This is all pretty nice to lead into our legs up pretty soon. So we get a lot of these leg energetics to flush them out. Lower down a little bit more now. I know some of you are very comfortable putting your knee on your blanket and can sweep that stretch through the quadricep. So, if you want to lower your back knee and stay with that version, you're welcome to. But you have kind of this whole mat space right now to play with your reach of your hands on your blocks or without blocks. And the guidance of that left knee, it's above the ankle, but it likely kind of steers sometimes a little bit forwards. Stay with the energy of the back leg, whether it's down or it's up. Okay, and then as we start to lower our back knees down, we're going to get our bolster. I want you to slide it in so it's underneath your leg. And you're going to walk your left foot over to the right, toe heel-ish kind of movement to the right. So the left knee comes down. And kind of the hip volume work I'm doing today is sort of minimal in some ways, right, for what we've done so far. So take a pigeon pose. Why not? This is probably a good time for it. So make it a pure pigeon pose, not a lot of fillers in it. So if my leg is on my bolster and my knee is pointing down to the left, okay, I want to be sure that that left foot, I can scoot it a little bit up and then pitch my body forward onto my blocks, or without the blocks, on the blanket on the floor you can get, or if you've got some other cushions that you use under your elbows. Yeah, and then really let that ripen in the left hip. Doesn't quite like pigeon pose, huh? It's kind of unique. It kind of gets that angle in the hip joint, kind of opens up some of the spaces that get particularly stiff. And it's quite helpful right in pelvic floor. So, you know, it's really opening up. It's a pretty creative movement for the hip joint. Unless you have pain, right? If it hurts and you don't practice the pose. You know, be in a little cat-cow focus. So you can move your ribs a little forward to arch, round the ribs back and forth. So arching and rounding. Breathing. You know, feel when you arch and you do the rounding pattern, is that layer when you come back forward to kind of arch and center. Just kind of notice if there's a little bit of a holding pattern that creates the pose, right? So you're not going to be able to kind of dive all the way front, right, for the arch. You have a spot where you stop and you feel. It's like a lot of things. So give yourself that chance to feel into that hip. Not that you haven't already for a couple of minutes. Just turning into a yin yoga. So capture a movement in the pelvis by swirling your weight. So your weight goes left leg, because that seems to be my dominant seat right now. And then feel if you can kind of get to the other side, and what would you do to do that, right? You could turn to the back of your bolster, probably. I don't think I've done that for a while, but we can turn this way in the front and then bring the left leg back. And since that leg has been turned this other direction, now you're asking it to go this direction. It might be a little bit, you know, kind of a little bit crabby about doing that. So just get a feel of moving that front hip tissue down, guide it, use the bolster as a holding pattern, and then lean your body weight. And every little movement, like you want to be kind of ancient moving into this. Like, so everything has a place, a layer, a purpose. And then once you come into the blocks, or you lower on the floor, or your hands under your head, you have that approach that you want to have as even as the first side. That can be tricky, huh? To find that balance. So coming into the pose. Now, if the intensity sort of rubs off and it gets a little bit more open feeling, then that doesn't mean that you have to pursue making it more intense again, like trying to find that, you know, that trigger of pulling and really getting my hip to stretch deeper, and maybe that's not as effective. So you find that sweet spot, that kind of tender point of stretch. And then as the pose progresses here for the next few moments, feel the back going into some movement like cat-cow, so the chin moves in, or maybe you tend to try to tuck the tailbone. You're just using the sequence here as a guide, like a little handbook to get into your body. Feel how the pose makes its way in. And then when you find stillness, which is pretty easy, and sometimes that movement you just kind of stop doing. And then the weight is produced through this rounded shape. So this is where you might feel like the curve and the roundedness is a nice momentum piece into transition. So, you know, especially if you feel a lot of stiffness in your body parts, which could be what you would say, oh, where do you feel? I feel in this body part. So feel if you can go some roundedness and lean to that right leg. And none of these pigeons do we kind of push into the arched pigeon. They're sleeping pigeons. So when you lean to the side, we're going to come back into Viparita Karani right away. So uncross if you need to shake out the legs, shake them out. Nothing that you are limited from doing. If you have one of these little balls, get it nearby. And then as you lower down with your pelvis on the bolster and your knees pointing up, get a feel for the approach now, which is kind of uber cool that we had this, when you had pigeon, you had this arch, you were that direction. But now, if you kind of notice, there's now this curved pattern on our back. So we'll get busy with our sand and our feet. Tuck the knees and bring your sand up and slide it across. And as it's on the bottoms of the feet, then your feet can go maybe slowly lifting. Maybe you kind of feel, oh, okay, if I project my feet forward, I'm a little challenged in my knee, but you want to find that sweet spot where you're not overly pushing your knee in this direction towards your head to get your sand up, because it's not the best for our knee. So we try to push a little up, away from that straight line, and then it challenges the core, and then maybe up you come. At least your feet do. Okay. So as the head is now below, we're back to that. Anytime I can get my brain in this other direction, I'm game. So maybe home more than offense. Now, when you are on that back brace, the bolster, can you flow the legs up? Feel the weight, that's true. There's weight bearing in the pose. And then take the arms into cactus. So it's been a while that we could find just that still point pose, but it's kind of flowing well with our pace right now. So the knees are apart. If there's even a glimmer that they're squeezing pretty close, you can always insert the ball in between. It is kind of it's a challenge when you use that. But you might also just keep your awareness on maintaining that separation. Or you can reset your sand on your feet and see if you can get the knees farther out. Another second option that's probably the fine tune is to let the tailbone press into the bolster. And that generally separates that line in the center of the knees. It's a small enough separation, but it's enough. Flexing, breathing to the diaphragmatic Holy system. You have this kind of waterfall going through the belly body into the leg body. And that's all the benefit for your heart and your brain. It's a vascular pose, but that belly brain really gets a nice, comforting, centering experience here. Now, if you get a little sleepy in a pose or the mind really transfers from present to no thought, you might bring it back to feeling your tailbone and then whatever's up from there. Right, so you get a feel of that leg springing up from the sitting bones. Now bending the knees. Sense when they have that full bending pattern before you're actually capable of getting the sand off. They're not quite fully bent. But you'll feel when they bend, maybe go with feeling versus comparing or looking, but feel they're bending. And then can you work on flexing your feet so the toes motion back? Now the waist is getting a little more pressure, so bending the knees so the thighs merge with the waist. Let the sand slough off, maybe with assistance. And then you're going to take a hold of your block or ball, either is fine. Whatever you get is probably best. Just grasp onto whatever's near you and put that, except for the blanket. Although I've seen the blanket used for this exact thing too, but that's a prop, less props in the room. But if you put that block between or ball, I want you to get a feel so that you can smooth out the back of your hips or the back of the pelvis. So you rock side to side. And when you do shift, you're going to feel your buttock go up if you go to the left and it crosses. So I want you to get a feel of moving your legs into the orbit that's between the knees, right? So you're squeezing in. And does it work best when you go to one side and then you initiate that focus of squeezing? It would be ideal if you keep it the whole time. You squeeze. It's always being squoze. Okay, continue for just a few more crossovers. These are good to practice before we do the full crossover with the sand, because it's like this muscle memory is really important for the brain, right? To have its repetition and recognition of the movement of the fibers. Since when we get in a still pose, it's, the brain gets that way too. So keep that movement going. If you gotta stop, that's okay. Come back into the center and then let the knees shift in towards your chest. Hands to the bolster. Now this to be a little careful, so if you have a block, you don't let it drop on you, right? Or the ball's a little bit lighter, so it's easier to hold. Now as you push the bolster away from under your pelvis, be sincere. I know some of us that just slides out, but if you can go slow so you can feel that tuck of the knees in and the stomach muscles working. So if I just get right to the tip of the tailbone and I still have my knees into the chest, then I'm working my core a little more. So I want you, as the bolster goes away, I want you to squeeze into the object, really squeeze. And then we lower the feet onto the bolster. Super squeeze, bridge. In with the knees, lift with the hips. Try to maintain that squeeze. Yeah, truly try to really get the lift of the hips, the lift of the hips. Arms down, shoulders back, palms open. Okay, so feel that bridge connection. Good. Yeah, the arms can be in a place where the shoulders are like the holders of the arms. It's kind of interesting to be with the arms in this very awareness, because they're usually kind of hanging off of the top part of you. So feeling them as kind of massaging back into them here. And then lower the spine, and you might enjoy having a block under you for one of those bridges. So let's take a moment for that. Take the time. I know you have a block between the legs. Just keep that. If you have a ball, that's fine too. But you're going to lift up your hips. You need a block for this, not another ball. And then place the block under the back of your pelvis if you can lift up your hips and put the block at the second height, and then place it so you feel like you can just kind of lie on it. The block is across, it's horizontal. It has been taught, well, it's been taught a trillion ways, I'm sure, but it has been taught with the block lengthwise, so spine-wise. I've seen that as a very strong pose pattern, and it actually isn't too bad some days. I mean, it's not my preferred pattern of it at all, to be honest, but it works okay right now. So you can let the block be either direction, but here's the one reason I want you to focus here is to get your arms down, your shoulders under you to lift open the chest. So the block is an afterthought there. So it being wide is probably the most comfortable. But I really want you to get on the shoulders here without like a shoulder stand-ish pressure. So you have the shoulders kind of tucking under and opening up very lightly through the chest lines, the arms. It would be tough to do a bicep curl right here. This should be positioned so you can't curl your hand into your shoulder. Okay, and breathe. The legs are sort of stuck. This would be a great one to do without the block between the knees. You could straighten your legs out. FYI. But I didn't think they had well enough on that. So if you decide you want to do that, you could remove your item between the knees and quick let the legs stretch down and get this full shoulder work, right? So it presses back, opens the chest. But the block between the knees is okay too. Okay, so especially feeling the rib cage, the frontal hip. If you have no block between the knees, the frontal hip opens. Okay, now as we slide the feet back up, if they have lowered down, if you are lured into that option, you gotta lift up and scoop the tailbone. That's the key, different here, scoop. Now, if you scoop and you slide the block away, we're gonna use this bolster for the left knee. So I want you to just keep that in mind, the left knee. You're gonna slide the spine down, spinal piece by spinal piece. Spine piece, that's really what that could be a class name, not today's, but I can think of that would be a good name, spine piece. So now take the bolster, just kick it over to the right side. You can do whatever movement that is comfortable for you to get that occurring. And then as your right leg is lengthening, doesn't mean it's perfectly straight, but it reaches down. I want you to feel that left leg moving across, like left to right, and then get it to reach to that bolster on the right. Feel the turn. This one is to enjoy. Not that we don't enjoy all poses, but feel if you need a ball right to that sacrum, if you have one, add it. And then if your knee is kind of dropping down in a position where you feel like if it was a little higher, it would be more comfortable for your back muscles, then add a blanket on top of the bolster. Okay, that can be nice. You can always try, and even if you just kind of toss a little bit of it on the bolster and see. And then we add a sandbag to the exterior left leg, optional. Okay. Reach through that left arm and let your head roll to the left. Now the key here would be to reach my left leg over to the bolster today. So I'm not interested in my left knee unbends because mine is starting to stretch a little bit out the knee. It's not as bent. It's about feeling in that left, so moving from that tucked pelvis to really, stretching through the side of the leg, giving us a full circle today. And the spinal here, these next 5 minutes or so here, feeling the weight into the hip. Now, once you aspire to reach with the leg, there might be a very quick response where you back off a little bit after even 10 seconds and you find where it settles. There's probably all of us are going to have that opportunity where we know better than to strain the variation. So you want to find where you're relatively working pretty hard to open up that back and the hip. But then you follow through and use your strategies of breathing, lengthening the exhales. Now, when we switch sides, I want you to just consider that this left hip is pretty vulnerable right now. It had a little openness. So feel how it winds from that left side of the back and sweeps over. Okay, so instead of like a figure four pose, which can be a little bit like, you know, box-like with the joint. So we're going to try to keep it swoopy, okay, swirly. So take the ball and the sand off. And then when you come back, you want to simply do circles with the hands holding onto the knees. So circling the sacrum. And make that circle pattern, you know, comfortably big. I mean, you don't want to go so far you can't hold your knees anymore, but enjoy how that pattern is motion and rounded patterns. And then we'll take that bolster, and if you had that blanket on it, just kind of kindly see if you can work those two together to get to the other side. You have to use your legs to kick it over to the left side. And then when you move your left leg straight down, then you cross over with the right. And as that thigh motions, you know, taking the time to even let the left side still feel like it's supported. So the last side that you're on, you probably felt that it had opened a little bit and had some perspective. So now on the second side, we use any of the props that we liked the last time. If you used a ball at the sacrum, remember you don't want it too far down at the rear. You want to have it feel like it's an anchor. And then as you add on a sandbag, feel that as a influence of circulation for the joints. And it's going to be helpful here for that lower leg, the left leg, to maybe bend a bit more than you anticipate, just to release in the back flesh. And then let your head roll to the right. Maybe your head rolls side to side. And feeling the breath through the ribs, lifting internally. Exhaling completely. Now the sensations might be very different on the second side for other parts of the back, you know, maybe through the spine. You might feel through the belly, even sounds in the organs, right? Maybe they have their own little composed experience now, starting out. So, you know, you want to use the props and kind of conduct the movements of the props to initiate support. And then as we all know that, we feel where the leg in this shape can settle. For the next few moments in the final part of this session today, really working on settling our experience internally. Yeah, just letting the breath move freely in the pose, or expecting the end of the pose. It can be part of your breathing too. Now certainly check in with the lower spine, the really interesting space where the lower back and the sacrum kind of weave, and then they weave into the hips, right into the pelvis. So feel right now where you want to end your practice with your back muscles today. So there's so much we can continue to do, I'm sure, but where would that continuation be internally for you right now? So you might take the sand away and the movement to get out, moving any props that are under you or on you. And then as you unwind, I would just roll to the side because you're right into that rounded space. And then getting your seat and your blocks under your bolster and get your legs up high. So you want to scoop around since you've had that rounded shape, and then not spend too much perfection energy on these props, but getting your legs up and then swooping in to get your rear close into the bolster, not on top, but close to that position where your lifted legs. And then the blanket could be under your head, it could be straight under your spine. If you're comfortable without a blanket under your head, you could put that second blanket on your bolster so the legs get higher. And then with the arms reaching, maybe a sandbag across the belly or a sandbag across the shins, or no sand. Okay, hands could be across the ribs individually, a hand to a rib side, and then feeling that awareness of the movement of breath. Because I imagine it's not in the ribs, right? It's probably lower port of the belly, moving the sandbag. It's great to have that prop because your focus goes to it, like you're trying to match the purpose of the prop in your body. So the sand has its ups and downs. So if that's making it too diaphragmatic breathing dominant, then you might choose to have your sand from your ribs down to your belly, straight down. And then hands by your sides. Then your breath might be evening out in your ribs and your belly. That's an option. Final motions here. Breathing slow. Returning the channel of focus. Simply setting your intention. Soaking up the practice. And let your absorption level be quite nutrient dense here, right? So as you breathe in, you filter the air through your nose and relaxing out of the mouth. Now feel where the shoulders are back and the arms are sliding down towards the bolster space, so they're relaxing at the fingers. Circle the feet. Feel both directions, feet circling. Now as the feet move into that relaxed sweep and heaviness, feel the lift of the belly with the breath, like you're doing some weight training with your breathing muscles. And then remove any sand that's on you. A little lightness ensues. Just let the breath go. Bring the knees in towards the chest, and as the legs draw in, The hands scoop up the back of the legs and you rock side to side. Roll to a side. Let's come together just as a collective moment. Take a moment when you get around to sitting up if you prefer to stay on your back, and that's okay. So we find simple common awareness from the breath in to the breath out together. So feeling where you happen to be seated or reclining. Let your hands either be relaxed beside you or in front of you together at the palms, but in a relaxed, neutral space for the brain to rest in towards the heart. And as we bow